I think that you get all that, and I think that what makes the song work is the contrast between the upbeat nature of ska, and this sort of serious, very human to human kind of message. I think without even knowing the details, I think that you can glean enough of that to understand why this song is different, beyond the horns and everything.
Hmm. Yeah. So what I'm curious about from your point of view, you've dove so deep into the '90s. I'm curious your perception of the context. We've kind of talked about it a little bit. You said that stuff like Fatboy Slim was where the critics assumed or wanted music to go at this era. You also
Yeah.
talked about stuff like Stone Temple Pilots and all these other kind of rock bands.
Hmm.
How did you see this song slash ska's place in culture in the '90s, specifically like at this sort of 95, 96, 97 point of view?
Yeah, so this is like overbroad, like super general, right? But like the cliche that's kind of true, but kind of a cliche is like Nirvana changes everything, right? So like 80s, 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 Nirvana. Now it's the 90s. Like and so from 91 to 94, it's grunge, right? And so that's Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam. That's when Seattle is the biggest place on earth, et cetera, et cetera. 94, like we said, is when Dookie and Smash come out. That's when Kurt Cobain takes his own life. Like there's still going to be grunge albums, but like grunge has peaked in this moment. And I think if you're talking about like the one biggest band on MTV, the radio, etc., I think Green Day takes over in 94,
Hmm.
right? And that sort of carries us through into 96, 97. And what interests me about the 90s as a whole is like 97 and 99 is bizarre, right? Like that's where you get like the one hit wonders and like the fluky kind of songs from this era just feel flukier to me. Like Sugar Ray's Fly is in this category, like a band, like they're a punk rock band and suddenly they're not. Like surprise, like this is where you get like Len's Steal My Sunshine.
Classic.
This is when you get Chumbawamba. It's just weird stuff starts happening, and like alternative rock as a brand is dying, as the next big thing. Teen pop is on the horizon. That's how, from 99 on, it's going to be teen pop, even on MTV. New metal is sort of taking over from grunge, but there's right in this zone, maybe starting in 95, it's sort of peaking from 97 and 99. In my head, it's just the weird. This is where the cherry poppin' daddies, this is where a neo swing movement can come in. And again, like maybe I'm overstating the degree to which they were stating it, but I felt like reading Rolling Stone, in 96, 97, like, the dude from Prodigy's on the cover, like they're talking up the Chemical Brothers and like the Crystal Method, and they're just trying to predict where music is going. That is their assumption, that it's going to get more electronic, it's going to get more involved with dance music, with rave music, whatever. But it seems like a free for all in this period, and it feels like this is the time when on a mainstream level, like, the mainstream gatekeepers can look at like a thriving, more regional scene like ska, like the Bosstones, whatever, and like anything, anyone can suddenly be an MTV rock star for a little while. And there's always one hit wonders, there's always flukes, there's always stuff out of nowhere, but it feels like in this moment, it's especially out of nowhere. And I wonder if a little of that energy, like the vacuum that's been created, benefits like Third Eye Blind and stuff like that, like Matchbox 20. Like there's a lot of different things happening, but there isn't one central focal point the way you had Nirvana in 91 or even Green Day in 94. Like it's the field is more open, I think. And I think that does ultimately benefit the boss tones, and this is where a hit can slip through and become suddenly huge, because it's just it's the field is wide open for some reason.
Yeah, definitely Nirvana changed everything. I mean, that's definitely not an overstatement. I mean, it really did because like everything everything that existed in the '80s that was part of the underground, that was considered part of the greater landscape of punk culture, had no place in mainstream until Nirvana.
That's right.
And that kind of opened the doors for that. But Green Day as well opened the doors for anything. actually directly part of punk culture.
Hmm. Sure.
I think that to some degree ska benefited from that because ska was sort of parts of ska were in punk culture.
Op Ivy, of course, like there's a symbiosis from the beginning.
And it seems to me like it also enabled labels and MTV and all these other places to have a concept of how to market ska.
Hmm. Yeah.
Ska it existed in the underground, ever since Two Tone, and there was efforts for it to, you know, to succeed. I mean, Fishbone and Untouchables were both signed to majors, but
Yeah.
there was always this kind of confusion about how to market these bands. Like, and Fishbone infamously were, considered like the greatest LA band of the 80s, and like nobody knew how to market them, and they had this huge support with their label. But I think with Green Day breaking and then them sort of going like Real Big Fish, Mighty Mighty Bosstones, Save Ferris, we can market it sort of like how we market punk, but a little bit more fun. That's my perception. I'm curious if that rings true to you as well.
I mean, punk but more fun works, as four words, to explain this, right? Like the other thing I sort of, the other overgeneralization that I make is, when Kurt Cobain dies, when grunge sort of peaks, like what we want now is something brighter. Like I think about the Basket Case video, right? Like just the hyper saturated color and just Billy Joe's eyes in that video. I feel like that's what we wanted now. We did not want dour monochrome whining, even though Green Day did plenty of whining, but just like even Longview, a song about, teenage languor or whatever and masturbation, etc. Like there's just a brighter tone, there's a little less self-flagellation to it. And I think that tone carries over. I think that's why you get like this pop punk boom, why the Warp Tour, it's just less dour. Like you think about like do like being one of the biggest things on the radio in '97. Like I don't think that's an accident. I do think that another quality that ska inherently has, like it's not vapid, it's not like happy for no reason or whatever, but there's just an upbeat. I'm just Rancid always popped to me on the radio, right? Like it sounds like these guys are having fun, and as much as I loved,
Yeah.
Nine Inch Nails, like the whole value proposition of that guy is he's not having fun. Like it was just cool, that the crowds were excited, that the music was upbeat, like just knowing somehow that the Bosstones were a great live band, and their shows were so fun and so energetic, like all of that really helps. And I do think that you're primed, society is primed for that kind of thing as well at the time that the impression that I get blows up.
Yeah, and I think something that's unique to the Bosstones in the '90s, it applies to ska in general, but it especially applies to the Bosstones, is that they very much saw themselves as entertainers, and they were very much like of the opinion that we're going to put on a show and people are going to have a good time, and it's not about how we look, it's not about how cool we look, it's about how much fun people are having. And I think that a lot of the alt rock bands of the '90s, I don't think they were quite there. They
No,
cared a lot about how they looked, and they cared a lot about coming off a certain way. But like you have the Bosstones, it's like all just dancing, plaid. You have Ben Carr on stage dancing. I mean,
exactly. The Pearl Jam did not have a designated on stage dancer,
Like Nirvana tried to do that a little bit.
a little bit.
I would be so curious to see. I would be very curious to see how Nirvana would have evolved.
Yeah.
Sure.
I feel like they would have been a different band.
They would have, they would have made very confounding records,
Yeah.
that like tainted their legacy. Like we would have done that whole thing, but it would have been fascinating. I completely agree. Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
As like a ska, as for people who were really into ska before ska was cool, how angry or skeptical were you when ska got cool? You're not at the shows, you're not looking at the new people or whatever, but like, is there any like unease to this moment when the boss tones are suddenly huge, even if you're like good for them, right? Like, do you resentful of the carpetbaggers?
I'll answer your question by saying this.